The rain against the window was a frantic heartbeat, a rhythm for the chaos unfolding in the dim light of the bedroom. Outside, the city of Seattle wept onto the glass, its lights blurring into long, sorrowful streaks. But inside, there was only heat, and the scent of damp earth mixed with sweat and skin. His fingers tangled in her hair that he had known for 5 years, yet tonight it felt silkier, wilder. He whispered her name, a prayer against her throat. Chloe. A sound, half moan, half sob, escaped her lips. Liam. Oh God, please. It was a plea that could mean anything, a protest that sounded like surrender, a contradiction that only fueled the fire between them. He shifted, his body covering hers, and in that moment of profound connection, a strange thought pierced through the haze of his desire. Chloe, you feel different, he breathed out, his voice thick and raw. He felt her stiffen beneath him, a barely perceptible tremor. Different? How? She asked, her voice a fragile whisper against his ear, so quiet he almost missed it over the storm. More. Here, he managed to say. Completely. With me. He didn't wait for an answer, couldn't bear to break the spell, so he silenced any further questions with a kiss that tasted of wine and desperation and a secret he couldn't yet name. Afterward, the silence that fell was heavier than the tangled sheets between them. The heat dissipated, leaving a cool, unnerving stillness in its wake. She turned away from him, her back a pale curve in the gloom, and the space she created felt like a chasm. This was the 4th night of her unexpected return. 4 nights since she, Chloe, was supposed to have been at a tech conference in San Francisco, only to appear at their door late one evening, soaked from the rain, claiming a series of canceled flights had sent her back home. For 4 nights, Liam had been living in a dream, a feverish rekindling of a love that had long since cooled to a comfortable ember. The passion was back, more intense than it had been in years, raw and consuming. Yet, with every touch, with every shared glance in the quiet moments, a dissonant chord struck deep within him. He felt closer to her than ever, but he also felt like he was with a stranger, a beautiful, intoxicating stranger who just happened to wear his girlfriend's face. He lay there, listening to the rain and the sound of her soft, even breathing, and wondered why the truth felt so much like a lie. It all began with an ending, or what should have been one. The end of a conversation, the end of a week together, the soft click of a door closing. Chloe's departure was, like everything else in their life now, a matter of quiet logistics. She stood in the hallway of their Seattle apartment, already dressed for the airport in a crisp, beige trench coat that seemed to repel not just the forecasted rain, but any form of spontaneous affection. Her checklist was verbal, precise. The spare keys are in the ceramic bowl. I've paid the internet bill. And please, Liam, remember to run the dishwasher. You know how I hate coming home to a full sink. He nodded from his position on the couch, a half-empty coffee mug warming his hands. He was already a ghost in his own home, a passive observer to the schedule that governed their lives. She was beautiful, he thought, in the way a perfectly designed piece of architecture is beautiful. All clean lines and flawless function. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe ponytail, not a single strand out of place. Her face, a perfect oval he once longed to trace for hours, was set in a mask of professional readiness for the conference ahead. He stood up and walked toward her, a sense of duty pulling him to his feet. He took her carry-on bag, feeling its surprising weight. Have a safe flight, he said, the words feeling inadequate, pre-recorded. She leaned in, but it wasn't for a real kiss. It was the sterile airplant kiss of a long-term couple, a brief dry press of lips against his cheek that left no warmth behind. I'll call you when I land in San Francisco, she promised, though they both knew the call would be brief, another item checked off her list. Then she was gone. The click of the lock sliding into place echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of the apartment. Liam stood there for a long moment, the scent of her perfume, something clean and vaguely floral, already fading from the air. He closed his eyes and exhaled, a slow, deep breath that he didn't realize he'd been holding. And in that breath, a feeling he was immediately ashamed of bloomed in his chest. Relief. A profound, unsettling sense of peace. The next 24 hours were a quiet revelation. The apartment, which had begun to feel like a shared office space, transformed back into a home. His home. He played his music, a melancholic blend of indie folk that Chloe always called depressing, and he played it loud. He left his design sketches spread across the dining room table, a chaotic mess of creativity that would normally have been tidied away into a neat portfolio. He ordered a greasy pizza for dinner and ate it straight from the box while watching an old black and white movie, the kind of film Chloe found boring and pretentious. He felt a sense of himself returning, a version of Liam he hadn't spent time with in years. It wasn't that he didn't love Chloe. He did, or at least, he loved the idea of her, the 5-year history they had built. But somewhere along the way, their lives had merged so completely that he felt he had been subsumed, his edges sanded down to fit neatly against hers. This brief solitude was a reminder that he still existed independently, and the thought was both liberating and terrifying. He went to bed that night feeling a pang of loneliness, but it was a clean, simple loneliness, far preferable to the complicated loneliness of lying next to someone and feeling a million miles away. The following evening, the rain returned with a vengeance, lashing against the large windows of their third-floor apartment in furious waves. Liam was lost in his work. The glow of his laptop screen, a small island of light in the darkened living room. The quiet hum of the computer and the drumming of the storm were his only companions. It was just past 11, and a comfortable weariness was beginning to settle into his bones. He was thinking about sleep when the sound cut through the night, sharp and intrusive. The doorbell. It rang twice, a demanding, urgent buzz that made him flinch. His first thought was that it was a neighbor, maybe complaining about the music he'd forgotten was still playing softly. He padded to the door, peering through the peephole. What he saw made his mind stutter to a halt. A woman stood on the welcome mat, haloed by the dim, watery light of the hallway. Her face was Chloe's, but it was a version of Chloe he had never seen before. Her hair was not in a neat ponytail. It was a dark, tangled mess, plastered to her forehead and cheeks by the rain. Her makeup was smudged, dark mascara running in faint tracks down her face. And her expression, it wasn't the controlled annoyance Chloe would have worn. It was something else entirely, something vulnerable, exhausted, almost frightened. He fumbled with the lock and pulled the door open. "Chloe? What on earth? I thought you were in San Francisco." She stood there, shivering, clutching the handle of her carry-on bag in a white-knuckled grip. It was Stella, but he didn't know that. He couldn't have known. He only saw the woman he'd said goodbye to just a day before, now looking utterly undone. She let out a shaky breath that turned into a half-sob. "Liam," she said, and her voice was huskier, lower than he remembered. "You will not believe the day I've had. It's been a complete nightmare." She stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold, rain-scented air with her. She didn't move to hug him, instead leaning back against the closed door as if its support was the only thing holding her up. "The flight," she began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The flight to SFO was delayed for hours because of the weather here. Then, when we finally took off, the fog in the Bay Area was too thick to land. They diverted us, to Portland of all places. We just sat on the tarmac for what felt like an eternity." He stared at her, his mind trying to process the information, to reconcile the woman who left yesterday with the woman standing before him now. Everything she said was plausible. The weather was notoriously fickle in the Pacific Northwest. "So you're coming from Portland?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "I took a bus," she confirmed, shaking her head as if to dislodge the memory. By the time they let us off the plane, the next connecting flight was gone. Everything was booked solid until tomorrow afternoon. I couldn't imagine sleeping in an airport terminal. I just wanted to be home." Her eyes, so like Chloe's, yet somehow deeper, darker, locked onto his. They were filled with a desperate exhaustion that short-circuited all of his nascent suspicions. This was not a test. This was a crisis. His partner had endured a terrible journey and had come home seeking comfort. That was the only narrative his brain could access. "Of course," he said, finally moving toward her, taking the cold, damp bag from her hand. "God, you must be freezing. Come in, get out of those wet clothes. I'll make you some tea." He ushered her further into the apartment, his brief, cherished solitude now a distant memory. As she walked past him toward the bedroom, he noticed she was wearing a soft gray sweater he didn't recognize, and jeans, which was odd, as Chloe almost exclusively wore business slacks when she traveled. but he dismissed it instantly. She must have bought them at the airport, he reasoned, after getting soaked. He watched her for a moment as she stood in the middle of the living room, her gaze sweeping across the space, across his scattered papers and the half-eaten pizza box on the coffee table. She wasn't looking at it with Chloe's familiar air of mild disapproval. Instead, she seemed to be memorizing it, absorbing the details of his quiet rebellion. Then her eyes met his again, and she gave him a small, weary smile that didn't quite reach them. It was a stranger's smile in a familiar face, a detail so unsettling that his mind simply refused to acknowledge it, filing it away under exhaustion and stress. He went to the kitchen to put the kettle on, the lie already settling into the foundation of their home, silent and profound, while the woman in his living room slowly, carefully, began to inhabit his girlfriend's life. The first sign of the beautiful, terrible lie came with the morning coffee. Liam awoke to the scent of it, stronger and richer than usual, a dark, earthy aroma that pulled him from the depths of sleep. Chloe's coffee was always a bit weak, a bit too milky, a functional caffeine delivery system, and nothing more. This was different. This was coffee made with intention. He found her in the kitchen, her back to him, as she stood by the window, a mug cradled in her hands. She was wearing one of his old, worn-out band t-shirts and a pair of Chloe's silk sleep shorts, a combination that was both jarringly intimate and completely foreign. Chloe would have already been dressed in her yoga pants and a practical tank top. Liam leaned against the doorframe, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over him, the feeling of seeing a familiar scene restaged with a new actor. "Morning," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. She turned and a slow smile spread across her face. It was Chloe's smile, but it felt warmer, less guarded. "I made coffee," she said, her voice a low purr. "Figured you could use a real cup after my dramatic entrance last night." He poured himself a mug, and the first sip was a jolt, bold and slightly bitter. It was exactly how he liked it, a preference he'd given up on mentioning to Chloe years ago. "Wow, this is strong," he said, trying to sound casual. "I thought you didn't like it this dark." She shrugged, her gaze drifting back out the window to the gray, rain-washed city. "Felt like a day for it," she replied vaguely. A small thing easily dismissed. He sat down at the small kitchen table, the silence between them comfortable, yet charged with a new energy. To break it, he brought up the one thing that had been occupying his mind for days. "So, you are not going to believe the email Mark sent out yesterday afternoon. The nerve of that guy, throwing the design team under the bus like that." He looked at her, expecting the familiar eye roll, the sigh that said, "Here we go again." Instead, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "Mark?" she asked, turning her full attention to him. "Sorry, my brain is still mush from yesterday. Remind me which one he is again? The tall one with the beard?" Liam's heart did a little stutter step, a cold prickle of unease. They had spent nearly half an hour on the phone just 3 days ago, on Tuesday, with him complaining about that very same Mark, the smarmy, passive-aggressive project lead. There was no way she could have forgotten. "No," he said slowly, "the short one, thinning hair, the one who always steals my ideas in meetings." "Oh, right. That guy," she said, her recovery a little too quick. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes avoiding his. "What did he do now?" Liam started to explain, but the energy had gone out of his story. He felt a sudden, powerful sense of dislocation. He was talking to his girlfriend of 5 years, but it felt like he was giving a briefing to a stranger. He quickly chalked it up to her journey. Of course she was forgetful. Her body was here in Seattle, but her mind was probably still on a bus somewhere between here and Portland, retracing the steps of a nightmare travel day. It was the only explanation that made sense, and he clung to it, because the alternative was too bizarre to even contemplate. Later that afternoon, the rain finally subsided into a fine, persistent drizzle. She had spent most of the day in a state of quiet observation, drifting through the apartment, picking up objects, a framed photo, a book from the shelf, one of his clay sculptures from college, and studying them with an unnerving intensity, as if seeing them for the first time. It was during one of these quiet spells that he saw it, another crack in the perfect facade of his reality. She had disappeared into the bedroom and emerged a few minutes later wearing one of Chloe's favorite dresses, a slip of emerald green silk that Chloe reserved for gallery openings and anniversary dinners. Chloe always wore that dress with a kind of rigid formality, her posture perfect, her movements careful, as if she were conscious of being on display. But now, on this woman, the dress was transformed. It clung to her body not like a uniform, but like a second skin. She moved with a fluid, unconscious grace, the silk whispering against her thighs as she walked. When she bent over to adjust the music, the fabric draped over the curve of her hips and the line of her spine in a way that made Liam's mouth go dry. He watched her, transfixed, feeling like a voyeur. He allowed his gaze to linger, to really study her for the first time since she'd arrived. The illusion of Chloe was flawless from a distance, but up close, under the soft gray light of the afternoon, he could see the minute discrepancies. Her lips, he realized, were just a fraction fuller than Chloe's, especially the bottom one, giving her a default expression that was less a placid smile and more a knowing pout. And her eyes, though the same shade of deep hazel, were different. Chloe's gaze was direct, efficient. This woman's gaze was absorbent. She watched him now from across the room, and he felt not just seen, but scrutinized, taken apart, and analyzed with a quiet, unnerving intelligence. He found himself thinking that if Chloe's beauty was a statement, this woman's was a question. The thought was so disloyal, so utterly strange, that he pushed it away violently. It had to be the stress. The travel had changed her, shaken her out of her routines, and maybe, just maybe, it was for the better. This version of Chloe was softer, more present, more alluring. He was ashamed to admit it, but he was drawn to the cracks, to the imperfections in the performance. He was falling for the mistakes. He told himself it was just relief, that he was simply happy to have her home, that this new energy was a sign they could break free from the rut they'd been in. It was a comforting lie, a story he told himself as she crossed the room and sat down beside him on the couch, closer than Chloe ever would. The true seduction, the one that would ultimately unravel him, had nothing to do with the emerald silk dress or the coffee that tasted of a different life. It began, as the most dangerous affairs often do, not with a touch, but with a question. It was later that evening the drizzle outside had thickened back into a steady, hypnotic rain, enclosing them in the warm, amber light of the apartment. They sat on the couch, a respectable distance between them, the television playing a muted documentary that neither of them was watching. An empty wine bottle stood on the coffee table, a silent testament to the hours that had already slipped by. It was Liam who broke the silence, his voice hesitant, as if testing the air for a coming storm. He started talking about his side project, a series of intricate architectural models for a low-income housing project, a passion he had been nurturing in secret for months. With Chloe, he had learned to keep these dreams to himself. She was a pragmatist, a woman who saw the world in spreadsheets and 5-year plans. His passion projects were, in her eyes, frivolous distractions from his billable hours, charming but ultimately useless hobbies. He began describing the concept, the use of sustainable materials, the focus on communal spaces, expecting the familiar, polite disinterest from her. He expected her to nod along while scrolling through her phone, or to offer a practical but soul-crushing critique like, "How would you ever get the zoning permits for that?" Instead, she turned her entire body toward him, tucking her legs beneath her on the cushion. The television, the rain, the entire world outside their living room seemed to dissolve in the intensity of her focus. When he finished his initial, nervous pitch, she didn't offer a solution. She simply asked, "But what does it feel like? When you imagine people living there, what's the feeling you want them to have?" The question caught him completely off guard. No one had ever asked him that. Chloe saw blueprints and budgets. This woman was asking to see his heart. He found himself stumbling over his words, trying to articulate the feeling of sanctuary, of dignity, of community he wanted to create. As he spoke, he became more animated, his hands shaping the air, carving out imaginary rooms and courtyards, and she listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't redirect. She just listened, her hazel eyes reflecting the passion in his own. He remembered a conversation from months ago, trying to explain the very same project to Chloe. She had been multitasking, simultaneously planning their grocery list and sorting the mail. "That's nice, honey," she had said, her eyes fixed on a utility bill, "but you're already so swamped at the firm." You need to protect your downtime, remember? It wasn't unkind, but it was a dismissal, a clear signal that this part of him, the dreaming part, was an inconvenience to their well-ordered life. He had felt his passion shrink under the weight of her practicality, and he had quietly packed the models away, another secret kept in the basement of his soul. But with this woman, this strange new version of Chloe, his dream was not an inconvenience, it was a point of connection. I think the mistake modern architects make, he found himself saying, the whine loosening his tongue, is that they design structures, not homes. They forget about the soul of a place. The soul, she repeated softly, the word hanging in the air between them. She leaned forward, her expression one of rapt attention. Tell me about the soul of this place you're building, Liam. And as he poured out months of suppressed creativity and yearning, she reached out and placed her hand gently on his forearm. The touch was electric. It wasn't a sexual touch, not explicitly, but it was profoundly intimate. It was a gesture of anchoring, of acknowledgement. It said, I am here with you. I hear you. Keep going. The warmth of her palm seeped through the sleeve of his shirt, a warmth that spread through his entire body, chasing away a chill he hadn't even realized he was carrying. He was so starved for this kind of attention, for this simple act of being seen, that it felt more intoxicating than any kiss. The physical desire he'd felt earlier, that confusing pull toward her body, now sharpened into a laser focus, because he realized it wasn't just her body he wanted. He wanted this feeling. He wanted the way she looked at him, as if he were the most fascinating person in the world. He wanted the validation, the shared excitement, the feeling that his deepest thoughts were not just welcome but desired. The seduction was complete, and it had happened without her ever having to remove a single article of clothing. She had simply paid attention. The space between them on the couch began to shrink, a slow, gravitational pull drawing them closer. Their knees were soon touching, and neither of them moved away. He was acutely aware of the soft texture of her jeans against his, of the faint, clean scent of her hair, of the rhythm of her breathing. He looked at her face, so achingly familiar, and for the first time he didn't try to reconcile the differences. He didn't try to see Chloe. He saw only the woman who was there, the woman who had spent the last hour making him feel more like himself than he had in years. The desire that rose in him was overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion and physical longing so powerful it left him breathless. It was a desire for her lips, her skin, her body, yes, but more than that, it was a desperate, aching desire for her soul, a soul he was beginning to realize he had never known at all. The silence that followed his confession was a living thing, a presence in the room that was heavier than the storm-laden air. The documentary had long since faded to black, its muted credits scrolling unnoticed on the screen. There was only the sound of the rain, a relentless, percussive drumming on the roof and windows, and the sound of two people breathing in the dark, separated by a few inches of sofa cushion that felt as wide as an ocean and as thin as a razor's edge. Liam looked at her, truly looked, and the carefully constructed image of Chloe, his girlfriend of 5 years, finally shattered. He saw the slight tremor in her full lower lip, the way her gaze held his with an unnerving mixture of fear and longing, the subtle tension in her shoulders that betrayed a story far more complex than a canceled flight. He was no longer trying to make sense of the discrepancies. He was drowning in them, and he found he didn't want to be saved. The wine, the lateness of the hour, the profound, soul-bearing intimacy of their conversation, it had all conspired to dismantle his defenses, leaving his long-dormant desire exposed and raw. He didn't know which one of them moved first. Perhaps it was the magnetic pull that had been growing between them all evening, a force of nature as undeniable as the storm outside. His hand came up, slowly, as if moving through water, and his fingers brushed a stray strand of damp hair from her cheek. Her skin was impossibly soft. She flinched, just slightly, her eyes widening, but she didn't pull away. He saw the silent, frantic battle raging within them. In that moment, he didn't care about the logistics, about San Francisco, about the woman he thought he knew. He only cared about the person in front of him, the stranger who had unlocked a part of him he thought was lost forever. He leaned in, and the last few inches felt like an eternity. Their lips met with a shocking gentleness, a tentative question asked in the dark. It was a kiss of profound confusion, of shared loneliness, of a desperate need to feel something, anything real. For a moment, she was utterly still, a statue of surprise. And then, a small, broken sound escaped her throat, and she answered him. Her lips softened against his, and the kiss deepened, no longer a question, but a confession. It was she who broke away first, a gasp tearing from her lungs. She pushed against his chest, her palms flat against his heart, which was hammering a rhythm that matched the rain. "Liam," she breathed, her voice shaking. "Liam, we shouldn't." Her eyes were wide with panic, a genuine terror that was far more potent than any token resistance. This wasn't a game. This was the precipice of a cliff, and she was begging him not to jump. It's happening too fast." He looked at her, at the beautiful, terrified face of the woman who wore his girlfriend's features like a mask. His own voice was a hoarse whisper. "Is it?" he asked, the words tasting like a sin. "Or is this the first real thing that's happened in this apartment in years?" He saw the impact of his words in her eyes. He saw her resolve crumble, her fear being consumed by a wave of something much older, much more powerful. Her hands, which had been pushing him away, curled into the fabric of his shirt, clinging to him. The battle was over. She had lost. Or perhaps she had won. She looked at him for one long, final moment, a silent exchange of guilt and absolution, and then she pulled him back to her. This kiss was different. There was no hesitation, no tenderness. It was a kiss of surrender, a hungry, desperate claiming. It was the taste of wine and rain and years of unspoken, forbidden longing on her part, and a reckless, exhilarating freedom on his. Their movements became frantic, a clumsy, urgent dance driven by pure instinct. His hands were in her hair, on her back, pulling her closer, trying to erase the last vestiges of space between them. Hers were just as desperate, tracing the muscles of his shoulders, her fingers digging into his arms as if she were afraid he might disappear. The journey from the living room to the bedroom was a blur of tangled limbs and breathless kisses against walls, a trail of discarded clothing marking their path of no return. The soft wool of her sweater, the cool silk of Chloe's shorts, they fell away, revealing a body that was both achingly familiar and thrillingly new. In the dim light filtering in from the street, he saw her, truly saw her, and the uncanny resemblance to Chloe was now a source of intense, almost painful arousal. It was the same canvas, but painted by a different artist, with bolder strokes and deeper shadows. The cool sheets of the bed were a shock against their heated skin. The storm outside seemed to move inside with them, a tempest of touch and sensation. Every caress was a discovery. He knew the geography of Chloe's body by heart, but this was a new exploration of a familiar map. The curve of her hip felt sharper, the muscle in her thigh leaner, the skin of her stomach softer. He was an archaeologist uncovering a hidden truth beneath a known world. "Chloe," he gasped against her neck. The name, a reflex, a lie he still needed to believe. He felt her whole body go rigid for a second at the name, a flicker of the lie that lay between them before she melted back into him. She didn't correct him. She couldn't. Instead, she just whispered his name over and over. "Liam, Liam." It was the only truth she could offer, the only piece of this stolen moment that truly belonged to her. The sounds in the room were a symphony of transgression, the relentless rain, the rustle of sheets, the soft, desperate moans that were torn from their throats. It wasn't gentle or slow. It was a feverish collision, a desperate attempt to physically manifest the overwhelming emotional connection that had ambushed them. Just as the world outside was illuminated by a sudden, brilliant flash of lightning, their own world shattered into a million pieces. A deafening crack of thunder followed, shaking the very frame of the building, a primal roar from the heavens that seemed to echo the final, irrevocable breaking of the boundary between them. And then, silence. A profound, ringing silence in the aftermath, broken only by the sound of the rain, now a soft, mournful patter, like the weeping of angels. They lay in the darkness, slick with sweat, not touching, their hearts pounding in the ruins of what they had just done. He awoke to a world washed clean. The storm had broken sometime in the deep of the night, and a pale, watery sunlight was now filtering through the blinds, striping the messy sheets in bars of gray and gold. For a blissful, ignorant moment, his mind was a blank slate, his body filled with a pleasant, languid exhaustion. Then the memories of the night before came rushing back, not in a gentle stream, but as a tidal wave, flooding him with flashes of lightning-lit skin, the taste of wine on a desperate kiss, the sound of a name Chloe gasped into the dark. He sat up abruptly, his heart beginning to pound a guilty rhythm against his ribs. The space beside him in the bed was empty. The indentation of her head was still on the pillow, a faint, ghostly outline that seemed to mock him. He had cheated. The thought was a cold, hard stone in his gut. He had betrayed 5 years of history, of shared meals and quiet companionship, for a night of frantic, reckless passion. But then a second thought, a slithering, insidious justification, followed immediately after. How could it be cheating if it was with her? With Chloe? He had woken up in his own bed, in his own apartment, after a night with his own girlfriend. And yet, the euphoria that hummed just beneath the surface of his guilt told a different story. The intimacy had been more profound, more earth-shatteringly real than anything he had shared with Chloe in years. It felt less like a betrayal and more like a homecoming, a return to a part of himself and of her that he thought was gone forever. Tangled in this web of contradiction, he swung his legs out of bed, the cool air of the morning raising goosebumps on his skin. The apartment was silent, save for the distant, muted sound of city traffic waking up. He found her on the small balcony that overlooked the street, a space they rarely used. She was wrapped in his navy blue bathrobe, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her dark, tangled hair stirring in the gentle morning breeze. She held a mug of coffee, but wasn't drinking it, her gaze fixed on the glistening, post-storm cityscape below. She looked beautiful but achingly fragile, like a piece of art he was forbidden to touch. Her silence was a wall, and he felt an immediate, desperate urge to scale it, to find the woman from last night, the one who had listened to his dreams and met his hunger with her own. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice sounding rough and alien in the quiet. She didn't turn, but he saw her nod, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Her distance didn't create space, it created a vacuum, pulling him in, making him want her more. Her quiet melancholy was infinitely more alluring than any overt seduction could ever be. He wanted to understand the shadows in her eyes, to soothe the tension he could see in the set of her shoulders. He wanted to earn back the connection they had forged in the dark. He retreated back into the bedroom to find some clothes, his mind racing. He needed to fix this, to make her see that last night wasn't a mistake but a breakthrough. And that's when he saw it. Lying in a heap on the worn armchair in the corner of the room was a tangle of black fabric. He stopped dead. It was lingerie. But it wasn't Chloe's lingerie. Chloe's underwear drawer was a sea of beige, white, and pale pink cotton. Her idea of something special was a matching set in navy blue. She valued comfort, practicality. She would never in a million years wear something like this. He stepped closer, as if approaching a dangerous animal. It was all thin straps and delicate, transparent lace, a creation of pure, unapologetic sensuality, a piece of evidence. A glaring, irrefutable clue that the narrative he was desperately clinging to was a lie. The stone in his gut turned to ice. That is not Chloe's. The thought was no longer a whisper. It was a scream in the silent theater of his mind. His brain scrambled, frantically trying to build a bridge over this gaping chasm of impossibility. She bought it, a desperate voice rationalized. She must have bought it for the trip. A surprise. To spice things up for when she got back. The explanation felt flimsy, pathetic. Chloe wasn't the spice things up with black lace type. But what was the alternative? That the woman on his balcony, the woman he had just poured his soul out to, the woman he had made love to with a passion that shook the foundations of his world, was not Chloe. That was insane. A plot from one of the strange black and white movies he loved so much. It was impossible. So his mind did what it had been doing for the last 2 days. It chose the more palatable lie. He clung to the idea that this was a deliberate transformation. The coffee, the forgotten colleague, the way she moved, the way she listened, and now this ridiculously sexy piece of lingerie. It was all connected. It was a message. This was his Chloe, making a desperate, dramatic effort to become the woman he secretly wanted. She was trying to save them. A wave of something akin to tenderness washed over him, drowning the last vestiges of suspicion. He felt a surge of protectiveness for her for this clumsy, beautiful, heartbreaking attempt to reignite their love. He saw it not as a deception, but as a sacrifice. He pulled on a t-shirt and went back to the balcony, the secret of the black lace, now a shared burden, though only he knew it. He stepped behind her, the chill of the morning air surrounding them. He could smell the coffee and the clean post-rain scent of her hair. He didn't speak. Instead, he slowly raised his hands and placed them on her shoulders. He felt her flinch at his touch, a brief, electric shock of tension, but she didn't pull away. He gently squeezed her shoulders, the gesture meant to be reassuring, but it felt possessive, a claim. He was no longer just the victim of a strange circumstance. He was now a guardian of the illusion. He would protect this new fragile reality because it was infinitely better than the one he had before. After a long moment, she let out a slow, shaky breath and leaned back against his chest, her head resting just below his shoulder. It was a surrender, an acceptance of his touch, and an unspoken agreement to continue the beautiful, terrifying charade. He closed his eyes, inhaling her scent, feeling the warmth of her body against his. A man willingly, eagerly, lost in the heart of a perfect lie. The days that followed were lived in a strange and beautiful bubble, a pocket of time that seemed to have disconnected from the rest of the world. The lie, now an unspoken covenant between them, became the very air they breathed. With every shared glance, every silent understanding, they fortified the walls of their fantasy, sealing themselves inside the apartment, which had transformed from a simple living space into a self-contained universe. The constant, dreary Seattle rain served as their accomplice, blurring the windows and muffling the sounds of the city, isolating them further in their newfound intimacy. They existed only for each other. Time was no longer measured by the clock on the wall, but by the rhythm of their interactions. The brewing of the morning coffee, the long, meandering conversations that filled the afternoons, the shared bottles of wine that bled into the deep, quiet nights. They cooked together, not as Chloe and Liam had a silent, efficient division of labor to get a meal on the table, but as two people discovering a shared language. On their fourth day together, she found a complicated recipe for pasta dough online, and they turned the kitchen into a chaotic, flour-dusted sanctuary. She laughed, a sound that was richer and deeper than Chloe's polite giggle, as Liam fumbled with the dough, getting more of it on his shirt than on the board. She reached out and dabbed a white smudge of flour onto the tip of his nose, and his first instinct was to recoil from the mess, the way Chloe would have. But he didn't. He looked into her sparkling, mischievous eyes and felt a surge of pure, uncomplicated joy. He retaliated, gently wiping his floury hands on her cheeks, and their small kitchen was suddenly filled with a breathless, exhilarating laughter that felt more nourishing than any food they could make. Later, as she stood over the stove, stirring a simmering tomato sauce, she fed him a taste from the wooden spoon. As he leaned in, his lips brushing her fingers, the gesture felt so intensely domestic, so profoundly couple-like, yet it was shot through with the thrill of the illicit. He was playing house with his own girlfriend, and it felt like the most exciting, dangerous game in the world. During these moments, she would tell him stories. She told him about a summer she'd spent at art camp as a teenager, learning to throw pottery, a memory he was certain Chloe had never once mentioned. She spoke of the visceral feeling of clay beneath her fingers, of the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from a lump of earth. He listened, captivated, filing it away as another piece of this new, emerging Chloe. He thought, this is who she was, before the world told her she had to be practical. This is the artist she keeps hidden away. He didn't know, couldn't know, that this memory wasn't buried. It was simply not Chloe's. It was Stella's, a piece of her true self offered up as a building block for their shared illusion. The sun finally broke through the clouds on the fifth day, and she, with her newfound spontaneity, declared that they were suffering from cabin fever. "We have to go outside," she'd said, "or we'll melt into this couch." They walked with no destination in mind through the damp, clean-smelling streets. It was a familiar route for Liam, one he often took on his lunch breaks, but seeing it through her eyes was like seeing it in color for the first time. Chloe had always walked with a purpose, her pace brisk, her focus on getting from one point to another. This woman, however, ambled. She stopped to admire the intricate ironwork on an old fire escape, her fingers tracing the rusty curlicues. She pointed out the ghost signs on the side of a brick building, faint, faded advertisements from a forgotten era, and she wove a story about the people who might have painted them. She saw the world not as a series of destinations, but as a gallery of details, and she saw it in a way that mirrored his own artistic sensibilities. "Look at that," she whispered, tugging on his sleeve, pointing toward the top of a skyscraper. "The sun is hitting the glass just right. It looks like the whole building is on fire." He looked up, and for the first time, he truly saw it too. Awe and a profound sense of kinship washed over him. He felt understood, seen, in his own language. On impulse, he reached for her hand, their fingers lacing together in a way that felt both perfectly natural and shockingly new. He felt a sharp intake of breath from her, and when he looked at her, he saw that her eyes were glistening. He squeezed her hand. "What is it?" he asked softly. She gave him a watery, brilliant smile. "Nothing," she said, her voice thick. "It's just a perfect day." He was falling completely, hopelessly in love, not just with this new version of Chloe, but with the man he became when he was with her. She brought out a lighter, more playful side of him that had been buried under years of routine and quiet compromise. He was no longer just Liam, the reliable software engineer. He was Liam, the man who laughed in a flower-dusted kitchen, the man who saw burning buildings in the sunset, the man who held hands with a beautiful, mysterious woman on a sun-drenched street. He was living inside a perfect fantasy, and he became its most fervent protector. Any flicker of doubt, any whisper of the black lace lingerie, any question about a forgotten memory, he actively, violently suppressed. To question the fantasy would be to risk its collapse, and that was a risk he was unwilling to take. Yet, there were moments, brief, fleeting instances where the artifice trembled. Sometimes, in the middle of a shared laugh, he would see it, a shadow of profound sorrow passing through her eyes, so quick he almost missed it. Or late at night, when she thought he was asleep, he would feel her hand lightly tracing his face in the dark, a touch filled with a desperate, heartbreaking tenderness, as if she were memorizing him before he vanished. If he asked, she would simply smile and say she was just so happy. It overwhelmed her. He chose to believe her. He had to. He was no longer a man being deceived. He was a willing believer, a devout worshiper at the altar of a beautiful lie, praying it would never have to end. The perfect day bled into a perfect night. The euphoria from their walk through the sunlit city lingered in the air of the apartment, a warm, golden haze that softened every corner and silenced every doubt. They ate the pasta they had made, a meal that tasted of laughter and shared effort, and the rest of the evening passed in a comfortable, intimate silence. This was no longer the charged, questioning silence of the first nights. This was the deep, easy quiet of two people who believed they were perfectly in sync, their thoughts and desires moving in a shared rhythm. For Liam, the transformation was complete. The confusion had vanished, replaced by a profound sense of certainty. This was not a fluke, not a temporary change brought on by a stressful trip. This was a rebirth. He was in love with his girlfriend again, but it was a new kind of love, deeper and more vibrant than the original. Later, while he was in the living room, rinsing their wine glasses, he realized she had gone quiet. He called her name Chloe, and there was no answer. A flicker of the old unease, a ghost of his former suspicion, tried to surface, but he pushed it down. He dried his hands and walked toward the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm yellow light spilling into the dark hallway. He pushed it open gently, and the sight that greeted him stopped his breath in his lungs. She was standing by the large window, her silhouette framed against the glittering tapestry of the Seattle skyline at night. The room was lit by only the small amber glow lamp on the bedside table, and she was wearing his shirt, a simple, white, button-down dress shirt he'd left on the chair that morning. It was far too big for her, the sleeves falling past her hands, the hem reaching the middle of her thighs, and beneath it, she wore nothing. Her long, graceful legs were bare, bathed in the soft, forgiving light. She turned as he entered, and her expression was not playful or coy. It was a look of complete, terrifying vulnerability. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and her face, free of makeup, looked younger, more open than he had ever seen it. There was no hesitation in her gaze, no game. It was a direct, silent invitation, an act of total surrender. This was not the chaotic, wine-fueled collision of their first encounter. That had been an accident, a breaking of rules. This was a deliberate choice. This was her, he thought, giving him all of herself, the final wall of her old reserve torn down. He walked toward her, his movements slow, deliberate, his heart a heavy, resonant drum in his chest. The air was thick with anticipation. He felt like he was approaching a sacred altar. He stopped just before her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "I feel," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper, "like I'm finally seeing you for the very first time." A sad, beautiful smile touched her lips. "Is that a good thing?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "It's the only thing," he answered, before leaning down to kiss her. The kiss was slow, deep, and full of the day's shared joy and the night's promise. There was no desperation in it, only a profound, worshipful tenderness. He raised his hands to the front of the shirt, his fingers finding the first small pearl-like button. He watched her eyes as he undid it, and then the next, and the next. It was a slow, deliberate unveiling. The soft cotton parted, revealing the smooth skin of her collarbones, the gentle hollow of her throat. As he reached the buttons over her chest, the fabric fell away to reveal the perfect, full curve of her breasts, their snowy peaks taut in the cool air of the room. She was exquisite, a masterpiece of shadow and light. He undid the last button, and the shirt fell open completely, hanging from her shoulders like the robes of a goddess. He let his gaze travel over her, the flat plane of her stomach, the gentle curve of her hips, the dark triangle of hair at the juncture of her thighs. "You are so beautiful," he breathed, the words feeling utterly inadequate. He slid the shirt from her shoulders, letting it pool in a white heap at her feet, and then he guided her back toward the bed. This time, there was no frenzy, no frantic tearing of clothes. It was a slow, sensual exploration, an act of loving worship. He learned the new map of her body with his hands in his mouth, committing every detail to memory. He discovered the sensitive skin behind her knee, the way a light touch on her ribs made her shiver. She responded to him with an intensity that left him breathless, her body arching to meet his, her hands clutching at his back. In this moment of pure physical connection, she seemed to find a temporary escape from the lie that defined her. There was no past, no future, only the truth of their bodies entwined in the soft light. As their passion built, the silence was broken by their soft, breathless sounds. "Liam," she would whisper, the name a prayer, an anchor in a swirling sea of sensation. And he would answer, "Chloe." "Oh God, Chloe." Yes, just like that. He said the name to reassure himself, to ground this impossible pleasure in the reality he had chosen to believe. For her, each time he said it, the name was a small, sharp sting of guilt, a price she was willing to pay for this stolen piece of heaven. Her pleasure was a wild, beautiful thing, a wave that he rode with her. He watched her face in the dim light, her eyes squeezed shut, her lips parted in a silent cry, and he felt a surge of love so powerful it almost hurt. He was the one who could do this, who could unlock this unrestrained passion within her. In the final, shattering moments, she clung to him, her body trembling, a desperate, silent sob caught in her throat. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, their bodies slick with sweat, their breathing slowly returning to normal. He felt a profound sense of peace, of rightness. This was it. This was the love he had been craving. He gathered her into his arms, pulling her head onto his chest. He felt her nestle against him, a complete, trusting surrender. He stroked her hair, his heart overflowing. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness, the words feeling more true than they ever had before. He felt her entire body go still for a moment, before she pressed her face deeper into his chest, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was about to be swept away. She said nothing back, and in his blissful, perfect ignorance, he mistook her silent, desperate grief for contentment. The morning after their surrender was drenched in an almost unnerving sense of peace. Liam awoke feeling as if he had been remade, every cell in his body humming with a quiet, joyful energy. The world felt new, pristine. He looked at the woman sleeping beside him, her face soft and unguarded in the morning light. and his heart swelled with a love so pure and powerful it felt like a physical presence in the room. This was his Chloe, the real Chloe, finally emerged from her chrysalis of practicality and reserve. He believed it with the ferocity of a convert. The last few days were not a strange interlude. They were a new beginning, the first chapter of the life he now knew they were always meant to have. The fantasy had completely supplanted his reality, and he had never been happier. They made breakfast together, moving around the small kitchen in an easy, unspoken choreography. He cooked bacon while she made pancakes, her own recipe, which was fluffier and had a hint of cinnamon. Another small, delightful discovery. They ate at the little table, their knees touching underneath, the comfortable silence broken only by their soft smiles and the clinking of forks against ceramic plates. There was no trace of the guilt from the first night, no lingering questions, only a shared golden contentment. Liam felt anchored, certain. He looked at her, laughing as she tried to catch a drop of maple syrup from her chin, and thought, "This is it. This is home." He had everything he had ever wanted. The peace he felt was the profound, tranquil peace of a man who has finally found his place in the world, unaware that he was standing on a trapdoor and that the ground was about to give way. The intrusion, when it came, was mundane, almost insultingly ordinary. It was the shrill, electronic ringing of a cell phone from the living room. She had been carrying Chloe's phone all week, a necessary prop for the performance, and she had left it on the arm of the couch while she went to take a shower. "Can you get that?" she called out, her voice echoing slightly from the bathroom over the sound of running water. "It's probably just my mom." Liam smiled. "Of course." He wiped his hands on a dish towel and walked into the living room, picking up the phone. The screen was lit up with a picture of an older, smiling woman with the same kind eyes, and the single word, "Mom." Answering his girlfriend's mother's call was the most normal, domestic act in the world. He felt a small, pleasant warmth at the rightness of it all. He swiped the screen. "Hi, Susan," he said cheerfully. "It's Liam." "Liam, honey, I was hoping I'd catch you." Susan's voice was warm and full of energy on the other end of the line. "I'm so glad you're there. I was just calling to coordinate a little." "Coordinate?" Liam asked, still smiling, leaning against the back of the couch. "What's up?" "Well, I was just trying to finalize my plan to come get Chloe from the airport. Her flight gets in tomorrow morning around 10, and you know how she hates taking a cab from SeaTac. I wanted to make sure I had the arrival time right before I drove into the city." The words came through the phone's speaker, clear and pleasant and utterly nonsensical. Liam's smile froze on his face. He felt a strange, buzzing sensation in his ears, as if he were suddenly underwater. "Tomorrow? Her flight gets in tomorrow?" He must have misheard. "Sorry, Susan," he said, forcing a small laugh. "You cut out for a second there. I thought you said her flight was tomorrow." "It is, sweetie," she replied, her voice still bright and oblivious. "Lands at 10:15, Terminal B. I'm just so glad she sent her sister over to keep you company while she was gone. It was so last minute, but that's Stella for you." The name hit him like a physical blow. Stella, the name of Chloe's identical twin sister. The reclusive artist who lived 3 states away, the sister he had only met twice in 5 years, the sister whose name had not been mentioned once all week. Stella. "I hope she hasn't been too much trouble," Susan continued, blissfully unaware of the devastation she was causing. "She can be a bit of a whirlwind. My Stella can. So different from her sister. Anyway, just have Chloe give me a call when you two get a chance. I'll see you both tomorrow. Bye now." The line went dead. Liam stood there, phone in hand, for a long, silent moment. The cheerful bye now echoed in the cavernous space that had just opened up inside his head. He looked at the phone's blank screen. Then he slowly, deliberately, lowered it. The sound of the shower was still running from the bathroom. The smell of bacon and coffee still hung in the air. The perfect morning was still all around him, but the world had tilted on its axis. And then, it happened. A sickening, horrifying click in the back of his mind, as the tumblers of a great, complex lock all fell into place at once. Stella, the coffee, made strong and dark, just the way he liked it. Stella, the forgotten colleague, Mark, a man Chloe had complained about for weeks. Stella, the childhood story about art camp and the feel of clay. Stella, the black lace lingerie, so alien and out of place in Chloe's world. The way she moved, the way she listened, the way she looked at him with that unnerving, absorbent gaze. The sadness he saw in her eyes, a sadness he had misinterpreted as overwhelming love. It wasn't a transformation, it was a performance. It wasn't a rebirth, it was an impersonation. Every beautiful, perfect moment of the past week, every shared laugh, every intimate touch, every whispered word was a lie. A meticulously crafted, soul-destroying lie. A wave of nausea so powerful it made him double over rose from his stomach. The euphoria he had felt just moments before curdled into a vile, corrosive poison. He wasn't a lucky man experiencing a second chance. He was a fool, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The feeling of being loved, of being seen, was replaced by the cold, humiliating horror of being used. He felt violated in a way that went far beyond the physical. His heart, his mind, his very soul had been trespassed upon. The water in the bathroom shut off. He heard the shower door slide open. He straightened up, his movements stiff, robotic. His face felt like a mask of ice. A moment later, she emerged from the hallway, wrapped in a fluffy white towel, another towel turbaned around her wet hair. She was humming softly, a contented little tune. Her skin was flushed and pink from the heat, and she looked relaxed, happy, and unbearably beautiful. She stopped when she saw his face. Her smile faltered. "Liam, is everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. The dead, hollow tone that came out of him was more terrifying than any shout could ever be. He held up the phone. "Your mom just called," he said, each word a chip of ice. "She sounds lovely. She's very excited to pick Chloe up from the airport." He let the sentence hang in the air, a poisoned dagger. He watched as the color drained from her face, as the happy, rosy glow was replaced by a stark, waxy pallor. He watched as the beautiful, lying eyes widened in absolute terror. He let a beat of silence pass, and then he delivered the final, fatal word, tomorrow. The single word hung in the air between them, a death sentence for the world they had built, tomorrow. For a long, agonizing moment, she didn't move. She didn't breathe. She was a statue carved from fear, the happy, flushed glow from her shower extinguished as if by a sudden, violent gust of wind. The fluffy white towel was clutched in her hand, a pathetic shield against the utter nakedness of her exposure. Her eyes, those beautiful lying eyes, were wide with a terror so profound it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Liam watched her, his own body, a rigid column of ice, his heart a cold, dead weight in his chest. He felt a strange, detached calm, the kind that follows a catastrophic explosion. The world had ended, and he was simply a spectator in its silent, gray aftermath. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. He could see the desperate scramble in her mind, the search for one last lie, one final, plausible explanation that could somehow stitch their shattered reality back together. But there was none. His face, his tone, the dead certainty in his eyes, it was a final, unbreachable wall. The pretense was over. The first sob tore from her throat, a ragged, ugly sound, and with it, her body seemed to collapse in on itself. The towel slipped from her nerveless fingers, pooling in a soft, white heap at her feet, leaving her completely bare before him. But there was nothing sensual about her nudity now. It was a raw, pitiful vulnerability, the final, desperate truth of a performer whose costume had been ripped away mid-show. She crumpled to the floor, her arms wrapping around herself as if to physically hold her broken pieces together, and she began to weep. The sound was a low, gut-wrenching keen of absolute despair. Liam didn't move to comfort her. He couldn't. The man who had held her with such tenderness just hours before was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out stranger. He looked down at the weeping woman on his floor, this cuckoo in his nest, and a single, searing question burned through the fog of his shock. It wasn't who she was. He knew who she was. It was the question that mattered so much more. "Why?" he asked, and the word was not a shout, but a dead, flat sound, a shard of glass. "Stella. Why?" The sound of her real name, spoken aloud in this apartment for the first time, seemed to shock her even more than his discovery. Her weeping hitched. She looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and mascara she'd missed in the shower, her expression one of utter, tragic ruin. "I didn't mean for it to happen." She choked out, the words fragmented, broken. I never meant for it to go this far. You didn't mean to? He repeated, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. It was a horrible sound. You didn't mean to impersonate your sister? You didn't mean to sleep in her bed, wear her clothes, lie to my face for a week? What part of this exactly was an accident? His voice was rising now, the icy calm beginning to crack, revealing the white-hot rage beneath. Tell me, I really want to know. Her confession, when it came, was not a coherent narrative, but a torrent of long-buried pain, a lifetime of quiet resentment and unrequited love pouring out in a flood of tears and desperate words. You have to understand, she pleaded, her voice raw. You can't possibly understand what it's like to be the other one, the shadow. My entire life, it's been Chloe and her sister. She was the perfect one, the smart one, the one who did everything right. She got the grades, the praise, the perfect life, the perfect boyfriend. Her eyes, full of a pain he was only just beginning to comprehend, locked onto his, and I was just Stella. The artistic one, the sensitive one, the messy one. This has nothing to do with me, he said, his voice hard, trying to shield himself from the pull of her pain. It has everything to do with you, she cried out, her voice cracking. Don't you see? I fell in love with you, Liam. Not with Chloe's boyfriend, with you. I did it from a distance, years ago. I would visit and I would watch you. I saw how your eyes would light up when you talked about your designs, something she never seemed to notice. I saw the quiet way you would look out the window when you thought no one was watching, the sadness you carried that she was too busy to see. I saw the man she had, the incredible, passionate, brilliant man she took for granted every single day, and it broke my heart. It broke my heart that she had you, and she didn't even see you. He flinched as if she had struck him, because her words were a terrible, agonizing mirror, reflecting the deepest, most secret truths of his own unhappiness. The connection he had felt with her, the feeling of being seen, it wasn't a trick, it was real, and that was the most devastating part of all. So when she told me about this trip, Stella continued, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper, this insane, stupid idea just took root in my head. It wasn't a plan, it was a moment of madness. I just wanted to know what it felt like. Just for a day, I wanted to know what it felt like to be the one you came home to, the one you talked to about your dreams. I just wanted to feel you look at me with love. Just once. Her gaze fell to the floor, and then one day became two, and you started to change. You started to open up. You laughed in a way I'd never heard you laugh, and the way you looked at me, it was real. I know it was, and I was so selfish. I couldn't give it up. Every moment with you was heaven, and every moment was a special kind of hell, knowing it was all built on a lie. She looked up at him again, her face a portrait of self-loathing. I am so sorry, Liam. I know I have destroyed everything. He stood there, reeling from the force of her confession. He was a building that had been dynamited, and he was feeling every floor, every wall, every window collapse inward, turning to dust and rubble. The anger was still there, a burning inferno of betrayal. But now it was mixed with a sick, confusing pity, and worse, a sliver of horrifying understanding. He wasn't just a victim, he was an accomplice. He had wanted the lie to be true. He had ignored the clues, explained away the inconsistencies, and fallen headfirst into the fantasy because it was better than his reality. The woman on the floor had lied to him, yes, but she had also given him the one thing he craved most in the world, a reflection of his best self. So, all of it, he said, his voice hollow, the walks, the conversations, last night. It was all just part of the act. He needed to believe it was all fake. It would be easier that way. Her answer destroyed that last, desperate hope. She shook her head, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. No, she whispered, her voice breaking completely. That was the only real thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. And in that moment, in the ruins of their beautiful, terrible lie, Liam was forced to confront the most painful truth of all. It was the most real thing that had happened to him, too. The confession, once spoken, did not clear the air. It poisoned it. The truth, now free from the confines of Stella's guilt-ridden heart, filled the apartment with a toxic, unbreathable atmosphere. They were suspended in the wreckage, two survivors of a catastrophe of their own making, unable to move forward, unable to go back. Stella had eventually gathered the towel and rewrapped it around her trembling body, a futile gesture of modesty in a room that had been stripped bare of all decency. She sat on the edge of the bed, her back hunched, her gaze fixed on a single, meaningless point on the hardwood floor. She was a specter at the scene of her own crime. Liam stood by the window, his back to her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest as if to physically contain the storm of rage, humiliation, and agonizing confusion that was tearing him apart. The city outside went on with its life, cars moving, people walking, a world of blissful ignorance that felt like a personal insult. How could the world continue when his had just ended? There were no more words to say. Every possible question had been answered by her devastating admission. Every touch, every kiss, every shared secret was now tainted, rewritten as an act of calculated deception or pathetic, self-deluding folly. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from betrayal and regret. And then came the sound, a small metallic jingle from the hallway, followed by the familiar, grating scrape of a key sliding into the lock of the front door. It was a sound Liam had heard thousands of times, a mundane domestic sound that had always signified safety, routine, the end of a day. Now, it was the sound of a guillotine blade being released. Both Liam and Stella flinched, as if struck by a physical blow. Their heads snapped toward the source of the sound, their eyes wide with a shared, synchronized panic. The time for their private reckoning was over. The real world, in its most devastating possible form, was coming home. The lock clicked, the doorknob turned, the door swung inward. Chloe stood on the threshold, silhouetted for a moment against the bright, impersonal light of the hallway. She was smiling, a tired but genuinely happy smile. Her hair was pulled back in its signature neat ponytail, and she was wearing the same practical trench coat she had left in. In one hand, she held her suitcase, and in the other, a small paper bag that smelled of coffee and pastries. She was an image of perfect, unsuspecting normalcy. "Honey, I'm home," she called out, her voice bright and full of relief. She kicked the door shut behind her and took a step inside, her smile faltering slightly as she took in the dim, silent apartment. "You will not believe the traffic from the airport. It was an absolute." Her words trailed off into nothing. Her gaze fell first on Liam. She saw his rigid posture, the terrifying, blank expression on his face, a look she had never seen before. Her smile vanished completely, replaced by a flicker of confusion and concern. "Liam, what's wrong?" Then, her eyes moved past him, into the bedroom, and she saw the second figure. She saw her sister. "Stella?" Chloe's voice was a whisper of pure disbelief. What are you doing here? I thought you were in Boise." She took another step into the room, her brain trying to compute the impossible data before her. Her sister, who was supposed to be 3 states away, was here in her apartment, looking like she had just crawled from a shipwreck. Her hair was a wet, tangled mess. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, and she was wearing— Chloe's eyes narrowed, a cold, clinical focus cutting through her confusion. Stella was wearing Liam's navy blue bathrobe, the one Chloe had bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. The scene clicked into place with the horrifying finality of a morgue drawer sliding shut. She didn't need to ask any more questions. The tableau before her was a confession in 3 silent acts. Her boyfriend, looking like his soul had been ripped out. Her sister, looking like a guilty, weeping child. And the unmade bed, a silent, rumpled witness in the background. She looked back at Liam, and her gaze was no longer confused. It was cold, so incredibly cold. "Liam," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "what is going on?" Liam opened his mouth, but no sound came out. What could he say? "Your sister pretended to be you, and I fell in love with her? I betrayed you with a lie I desperately wanted to believe?" The truth was so monstrous, so insane, it could not be formed into words. His silence was his answer. Stella, from her place on the bed, let out a small, strangled sob, a sound of pure, undiluted misery. Chloe's gaze shifted to her sister, and the look that passed between the two twins was one that no outsider could ever fully comprehend. It contained a lifetime of shared history, of love and rivalry, of secrets and sisterhood. All of it now incinerated in this single, unbearable moment. Chloe's eyes scanned the room, her mind, always so practical, now searching for confirmation, for the final damning piece of evidence. And then she saw it. On the armchair, where it had lain for days, was the small, obscene heap of black lace. Her eyes locked onto it, and Liam saw a flicker of something in her expression, not just pain, but a kind of bitter, clinical understanding. She knew she didn't own anything like that. That piece of lingerie did not belong in her world. She turned away from them then. With a calm, deliberate slowness, she walked to the small table by the entrance and placed the bag of pastries down. She set her keys beside it, the metallic clink unnaturally loud in the dead silence. She did not throw them. She did not slam them down. She placed them, as if they were a piece of fragile glass. It was the most terrifyingly controlled gesture Liam had ever seen. He finally found his voice, a pathetic, croaking sound. "Chloe," he started, taking a step toward her. "Wait. I can explain." She turned back to face him, and her face was a perfect, unreadable mask of betrayal. The warm, vibrant woman who had walked through the door just minutes ago was gone, replaced by this chillingly calm stranger. "No," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "I don't think you can." She looked from his shattered face to her sister's weeping form, and then back again. A single, perfect tear escaped her eye and traced a slow, silent path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. "Don't," she whispered, the single word, a final, brutal command. And with that, she turned, picked up the suitcase she had just brought home, and walked back out the door, closing it softly, definitively, behind her. Chloe's departure was not a dramatic slam of a door, but a soft, final click that echoed in the silent apartment with the force of a gunshot. It was a sound of absolute finality. For a long time after she was gone, neither Liam nor Stella moved. They remained frozen in the tableau of their ruin, the air thick with the ghosts of what had been said and the suffocating weight of what couldn't be. The bag of pastries Chloe had brought home sat on the table, a pathetic, mundane monument to a morning that had started with such perfect, ignorant bliss. Finally, Stella stirred. The movement was slow, agonizing, the effort of a body that had suffered a catastrophic blow. She rose from the floor, her borrowed robe clutched around her, and walked back into the bedroom without a word. Liam heard the quiet sounds of her dressing, the rustle of fabric, the soft zip of a bag. She emerged a few minutes later, dressed in the same clothes she had arrived in a lifetime ago. Her face was pale and scrubbed clean of tears, but her eyes were hollowed-out voids of grief. She stopped in front of him, her small suitcase in her hand. There were no apologies left to give, no excuses that could possibly hold any meaning. "I'll go," she said, her voice a dead, flat whisper. It was all that was left. Liam just nodded, unable to look at her, his gaze fixed on the wall behind her. He couldn't bear to look into the eyes that had shown him heaven and then dragged him down to hell. He heard her walk to the door. He heard it open. Then her voice, small and broken, came one last time. "For what it's worth," she whispered, "I'm sorry you had to meet me." He didn't turn. He just listened to the door close, another soft final click, and then he was, at last, completely and utterly alone. The silence that descended was not the peaceful, comfortable silence he had cherished just days ago. It was a malevolent, living entity. It pressed in on him from all sides, amplifying the frantic, chaotic noise in his own head. The apartment, once their sanctuary, their bubble of fantasy, had transformed into a mausoleum. Every object was an artifact of the lie. The wine glasses in the sink were relics of their Last Supper. The unmade bed was a crime scene. The faint scent of her perfume, so like Chloe's but subtly different, was the lingering presence of a ghost. He walked through the rooms like a man in a trance, touching the back of the sofa where they had talked for hours, his fingers tracing the rim of the coffee mug she had used that morning. He had not been living in a home. He had been living on a stage, a meticulously designed set, and the play was now over. The actors had all gone home, leaving him alone with the hollow props. He sat on the couch as the afternoon faded into a gray, melancholic dusk. The questions came then, a relentless, punishing interrogation conducted in the court of his own mind. Had he cheated on Chloe? The answer felt both obvious and impossibly complex. He had slept with her sister, yes, but in his mind, in his heart, he had been making love to the woman he thought was his girlfriend, a woman who was finally, miraculously, connecting with him. Was it a betrayal to love a better version of the person you were with? Then came the more dangerous question, the one that sliced the deepest. Did he fall in love with Stella? He replayed the week, every conversation, every shared glance, every touch. He had been captivated not by Chloe's face, but by the soul, looking out from behind it. He had fallen for Stella's wit, her artistic eye, her ability to listen, her quiet, aching vulnerability. He had fallen for her. The lie had simply given him the permission to do so. And with that admission came the most unbearable truth of all. His relationship with Chloe had been a ghost long before Stella ever appeared at his door. It had been a comfortable arrangement, a partnership of shared habits and a shared lease, but the love, the passion, the vital, living connection that had died years ago. They had just been too polite, or perhaps too cowardly, to sign the death certificate. Stella hadn't been a homewrecker. She had been an earthquake, a seismic event that had simply shaken a rotten, hollow structure until it finally, inevitably, collapsed. He was not an innocent victim. He had been a willing participant in the fantasy because it offered him an escape from the quiet desperation of his real life. He had ignored every red flag, every warning bell in his own mind, because the lie she was offering was so much more beautiful than the truth he was living. Night fell completely. The city lights outside began to glitter like a handful of cold, distant diamonds. He didn't bother to turn on the lights. He just sat there in the darkness, a man unmoored from his own life. He had lost both of them. He could never go back to the comfortable, numb existence with Chloe, not now that he knew what it felt like to be truly seen. And he could never have the vibrant, intoxicating connection he'd had with Stella, because its very foundation was a poison that had contaminated everything it touched. He was trapped between the ghost of a dead love and the love of a ghost. He eventually rose and walked to the window, the same window where she had stood, bathed in lamplight, offering him a new world. He rested his forehead against the cool glass, and outside it began to rain. A soft, gentle drizzle that streaked down the pane, blurring the lights of the city into a beautiful, sorrowful mess. He watched the raindrops trace their paths down the glass, each one a separate, lonely journey to a shared, inevitable end, and wondered how long a person could live in the ruins, haunted by the memory of a lie that felt more real than any truth he had ever known.